With Parliament convening on Monday, the Congress party has staked a formal claim to the leadership of the opposition in the Lok Sabha. With just 44 seats, on what grounds has it made this demand? On the other hand, even if it doesn't qualify on numbers, is there a bigger moral case for granting the post to the party? That's the first big debate tonight. And now joining me for the debate on the leadership of the opposition in the Lok Sabha is Congress spokesman and lawyer Abhishek Singhvi, BJP spokesperson and lawyer Pinky Anand, Aam Aadmi Party leader and lawyer Prashant Bhushan, and the former Secretary General of the Lok Sabha, Subhash Kashyap. Abhishek Singhvi, the Congress party believes that it's entitled to the official position of leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, but given that you only have 44 MPs, which is less than 1/10 of the House by a fairly significant number, on what grounds do you believe you're entitled to this official position?
There are several grounds, two sets of them, which you have yourself rightly mentioned, and I think your second mention is even more important than the first. For a minute, forget the law, and I have the law with me, and I'll deal with it in a moment. Go to the larger picture, the moral ground as you put it, or the larger picture as I would call it. I think for good governance, in today's day and age with several statutes requiring accountability, a cross-section of views, independence and objectivity, the role of the opposition, had there been only 20 people in all the opposition put together, even then a LOP is a necessity for having a countervailing viewpoint. And I think a leader of the opposition is now so widespread a phenomenon in statutes that those statutes on the larger picture, I'm not yet gone to the points in the nitty-gritty of the law, on the larger picture, Karan, they represent a seamless web of parliamentary mandate which presupposes that there will always be a countervailing important viewpoint which the government of the day will take into account. And I think magnanimity, decency and a give and take requires that the government should itself have, with a certain amount of grace, pushed for it, endorsed our request to the Speaker. And I don't quite appreciate at all this, I would call it a bit of a cussedness of the government.
What about the specific case in terms of law? What case do you have there? Give me a quick, short, sharp answer.
2 points. Yes. Very quick, short, sharp answer. One, post 77, the scenario is changed completely with the Act. That is an Act which identifies, recognizes and gives everything about an LOP. That's parliamentary mandate.
And number two?
Post 77, after that Act, there have been at least 4 Acts from the CVC, NHRC to the CIC, which in fact in law are deemed to be enacted on the basis of the 77 Act.
Okay.
Because the later Act is supposed to the previous Act. Now when the later Acts say that for this consultation you have to have a LOP, they presuppose that the largest numerical majority test of the 77 Act will be activated.
Okay.
And most important, examples of pre-77 are irrelevant. From 89 till now we always have a LOP. So we boil down to a 80 to 89 period.
All right.
Now in that period, the question of a no LOP or an LOP with the largest majority was never tested.
Okay.
The arguments I am making were never tested because nobody bothered to push for that status.
Let me then stop you there.
And the Speaker never ruled accordingly. And lastly, in half a second, 121, the rule put forward, cannot override the statute.
All right, I'm going to stop you there. You've made a lot of points. Some of them you've made in a somewhat jumbled manner, but I'm going to pick them apart one by one and clarify them for the audience because I think it's important that we should lay these out in a structured way rather than in a amalgamated, jumbled fashion. Let's start with the question I put to him, which I'm going to put to you as well, Mr. Kashyap. As a former Secretary General of the Lok Sabha, can a party with just 44 MPs, which is 10 less than 1/10 of the size of the Lok Sabha, qualify for the official leader of the opposition post? First answer just that specific question.
No.
No. Why?
The law is against it. Traditions and conventions and practice all are against it.
So A, the law, B, traditions, C, practice. So there are 3 reasons why if you are below the 1/10 margin, you cannot be official leader of opposition.
That's it.
Pinky Anand, on that particular specific point of numbers, where does the BJP stand?
BJP has yet to take a stand on that, so let's wait for that period. However, there is a problem as far as the constitution is concerned and the rules and practices are concerned. If you don't have 1/10 of the number of seats of the Lok Sabha, which in this case admittedly the Congress does not have, having 44, which is 10 less than 54, it is up to the speaker to decide the issue.
But can I clarify something? You're telling me officially as the spokesman of the party that the BJP does not have an official stand? You still have to make up your mind officially as a party about this. A quick yes or no?
Yes.
Prashant Bhushan, despite what Pinky Anand has said, and this is not actually a contradiction of her, BJP ministers have repeatedly said that this is a matter best left to the discretion of the speaker. Now, given that in the 21st century, the leader of the opposition is an essential part of what I might call the parliamentary fabric of the country, and secondly, given that no democracy can function effectively or at least democratically without a leader of the opposition, should this matter be left to one individual's discretion?
No, I don't think so. I think if there is, I am not aware of any law which prescribes that you can't have a leader of opposition unless a party has at least 10% of the seats. There may be a rule or a convention to that effect, but that can always be changed and amended in the light of the current circumstances. Today there are, as Abhishek also pointed out, there are a number of statutes, including the latest Lokpal Act, which require the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha to be a member of important selection committees. And therefore, to say that there need not be any leader of opposition at all would create serious problems in the effectuation of these various important statutes, important laws. And I don't believe that there is anything sacrosanct about 10% of the number of seats in the Lok Sabha. There need not be any such rule or convention at all. In fact, in my view, the largest group or the largest coalition in the opposition, that means any opposition parties can come together and propose that, look, we want so-and-so to be our leader of opposition
can I stop you
on
there?
behalf of our party.
Can I stop you? A bit like, can I stop you? Like Abhishek, you're making an amalgamation of many arguments together. Let's separate them one by one, otherwise the audience will be confused by too many arguments jumbled together. Abhishek Singhvi, I'm going to take up first the point made by Mr. Kashyap that parliamentary practice and convention and precedence is against granting the official leadership of the opposition to your party. Parliament, as you know, functions by precedent, and the precedent is that the Lok Sabha has only had an official leader of the opposition when the largest opposition party had at least a minimum of 1/10 of the seats in the House. When it didn't, and that was the case right up till 1969, it was the case again right through the 1980s, there wasn't an official leader of the opposition. How can that precedent now be overturned just to suit Congress?
Dr. Kashyap is a very erudite scholar of this field, and I respect his view and his knowledge on this subject. My answer is simple. After 1977 parliamentary mandate, in the 80 to 89 period, the proposition that the convention will prevail has never been asserted and tested, or that the 77 Act mandate will prevail has never been tested and asserted, and therefore there is no precedent really of a collision between the 77 and a 80 to 89 practice. The first time this test is being put is now, because after 89 we've always had an LOP. Once the test is put in contemporary scenario, precedents are not sterile, they have to be adapted and tailored to the context. There was in the 80 to 89 period, as far as I remember, not a single one of the 4 acts I've mentioned, NHRC, CIC, CVC, Lokpal.
Just a moment.
That context, along with the absence of a prohibition, means that we must read it purposively and decide that this is so.
Let me stop you there. I'm going to translate into simple layman's language the technical words you've used and put that question to Mr. Kashyap. Mr. Kashyap, the real point he's making is this. The precedent that I cited was established by the first Speaker of the Lok Sabha, Mr. Mavlankar, and it's become what is called Direction 121C. But hasn't that direction been overtaken by the 1977 Leader of the Opposition in Parliament Act, which doesn't specify the need for any specific number of seats for that post? Secondly, that direction is a rule. The 1977 Act is legislation. Doesn't legislation take precedence over a rule?
First, Mavlankar's Direction 121C did not come out of the hat from Mavlankar. It has a hoary past history in the British House of Commons. It is essential to the parliamentary system and has always been so, not only in India but in Britain also. 1/10. In Britain they say, you look at May's parliamentary practice, they say that the party in a position should be able to make the House. That is, it should have the quorum.
Which is 1/10.
Which is 1/10.
So just to interrupt, if in Britain the biggest opposition party is less than 1/10 of the House of Commons,
yes,
it cannot be the official leader of the opposition.
That's right. That's right.
So this is a practice followed in Britain.
That's right. But fortunately in Britain they have a 2-party or 3-party system. So for large number of years such a situation has not arisen.
But if after the next election,
that's right,
the opposition party was less than 1/10, it wouldn't be the official.
It wouldn't have the official leader of the opposition. So it goes back to parliamentary history. Second, you are quite right, the law will have precedence over the rules or directions, but the law is very clear. There are 2 laws. One is 1977 law, which is for salary and allowances to leaders of the opposition in parliament, which gives 3 conditions. One condition is it should be the largest party, second that it should be in opposition, and third that it should be recognized as a party by the speaker. The third, the speaker does not have any discretion. It is not a question of magnanimity or large-heartedness of the speaker of the ruling party. We are governed by rule of law, and the speaker has to be governed by laws. Before 77, he was governed by that convention and Mavlankar's ruling. After 77, and nobody can dispute that 1982, 1989, they came after the 77 law.
1998.
No.
You're talking of the leaders and whips of parties and groups facilities act.
Please hold on. The period of 1980 to 1989, it came after the 1977 Act, and during that period nobody made halla gulla. It is not a question of not being tested, but the honorable leaders in the opposition recognized that they did not have the requisite majority, so they did not stake a claim, and the Congress party, Mrs. Indira Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi were prime ministers. They did not show any magnanimity or large-heartedness.
Let me go back to Abhishek Singhvi. Abhishek Singhvi, what you're hearing is 2 cogent points from Mr. Kashyap. First, that the Direction 121C has been inherited from British parliamentary practice, and the same practice applies in the House of Commons. Were the House of Commons to have an opposition party, the single largest opposition party, under 1/10 of the size of the House, it wouldn't have official status. That's the first point. Secondly, and more importantly, the 1977 Act was overtaken by the way the precedent was applied in the 80s, and despite that 1977 Act, which you keep citing, in the 80s there was no official leader of the opposition. Therefore, the practice of the 80s will still apply today. A quick answer to those in layman's language preferably.
I think Dr. Kashyap, with great respect to him, has already answered both those questions largely in my favor. The first, no doubt 121 encapsulates a old tradition, but that would override the 77 Act, and the 77 Act comes much later than 121, and without anything more, 121 would be overridden by an Act of Parliament, the mandate of which is the 77 Act. He accepts that, and according to me, that does override. Second, post 77, no doubt, we had a factual period, 80 to 89, where we had no LOP. Mr. Dr. Kashyap equally accepts that there was no halla gulla at that time on that issue. It is the very absence of that halla gulla which I rely upon to argue that no precedent therefore can be set
Okay.
that 80 to 89 accepted that notwithstanding the 77 Act, you will have no LOP. That is why I say unless the proposition was tested in 80 to 89 by the Speaker, by Party A asserting that the Speaker, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, please decide
I
this.
take your point. Let's not.
There will
let's
be no
not,
precedent.
Well,
so Dr. Kashyap's arguments are twofold. One
well,
is
hang
rule,
on a
one
second.
is
I'm
precedent.
interrupting you now
Both
because
rule and
I don't want
precedent
to.
fail.
Just a moment. I don't want you to confuse the audience with technical detail. You're making a very simple point, which I'm going to once again put in simple layman's language. The great danger when you have erudite lawyers is that they make their language so difficult for ordinary people to follow. What you're saying is that the real test of the point Mr. Kashyap is making will be now. It was never tested earlier, and that test will in fact decide whether the extent to which you're right or Mr. Kashyap is right. Let me pick up on another point and put that to Pinky Anand. Pinky Anand, that's the point that Prashant Bhushan was making. He said that in fact after the 90s, that is to say in the last 2 decades, there are a series of legislations that have been passed by Parliament that make it critical to have a leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha because he's part or she's part of the process for choosing the CIC, the CVC, the NHRC, and now most recently the Lokpal. Therefore, if you don't have a leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, beyond the moral concern and beyond the impairment of democracy, you can't function as well. For functional reasons, particularly because of these 4 appointment procedures, you must have one. Won't you accept that?
Karan, I'm afraid that may not necessarily be so, because ultimately the question is the presence of a leader of opposition mandatory for these appointments, or can the appointments be done in the absence of leader of opposition when there is no leader of opposition under the Act and the rules? That is the question which has to be decided, and ultimately, as Dr. Kashyap has said quite categorically, and to this extent even Abhishek acknowledges, is the fact that the Speaker has to make a decision on this subject. Under the 1977 Act, it is a person who is recognized by the Speaker. So if the Speaker recognizes, then there will be leader of opposition. If the Speaker does not recognize, you will not have a leader of opposition. In layman's language, as you say, A. And B, for a parliamentary democracy to function, you have to have the quorum. You have to have an opposition which is able to have the quorum which is necessary to constitute the House. How can you have the House being constituted by somebody who doesn't have the necessary quorum?
That's back to, in fact, the British practice point and direction 121C that Mr. Kashyap argued a moment ago. Let me pick up on the first half of your answer and put that to Prashant Bhushan. You said that one critical reason, Mr. Bhushan, why you need a leader of the opposition is because otherwise you don't have a quorum for the appointment of CIC, CVC, NHRC and Lokpal. But as Pinky Anand points out, all of those acts do say that if one or more of the people is not available, the others who are can carry on with the appointment. That's one way around your problem. The second is that you could conceivably, if you want, include the leader of the opposition in the Rajya Sabha. He is available and he could substitute for the leader of the opposition in the Lok Sabha. Why is either of those solutions not an answer to your problem?
Or amend the law.
Or you could amend the law, as Mr. Kashyap says.
Well, why do you need to amend the law when you can just change this, whatever practice there has grown around this proposition, that in order to have a leader of opposition, you need to have a party with at least 1/10 of the seats. I mean, what is the great sanctity to this rule or this convention that you must have 1/10 of the seats in Parliament in order to have a leader of opposition?
Well, can I explain?
Why can't you change this convention in a parliamentary democracy?
I'll answer that question. The sanctity is that 1/10 of the House is needed for there to be a quorum, and the argument is that a leader of the opposition has special standing because in the absence of the government, he or she can call the Parliament together and has a quorum to do so, so that if for some reason the government isn't functioning, the leader of the opposition can step in and make Parliament function. Now, that's why 1/10 is important.
Well, he need not make Parliament function just with the help of his own party. As I said, you can even elect a leader of opposition. 3-4 parties can get together and nominate one person from amongst themselves to be the leader of opposition. I have been saying that it need not be the single largest party. It should be the single largest coalition who nominate a common person as their leader of opposition.
Mr. Kashyap,
and there is in a parliamentary democracy, you need to have a leader of opposition, and that is why.
Mr. Kashyap,
that is why this whole
just a moment.
business.
Let me stop you. Mr. Kashyap, you're about to say that alliances are not recognized by Parliament, or are you agreement with that suggestion from Prashant Bhushan? What did your nodding head mean?
No, my nodding head meant agreement with Mr. Prashant Bhushan to some extent. But let me tell you something which is
so
conclusive.
Just note, if you're agreeing with him, then Congress can claim leadership of the opposition on the grounds that it heads the biggest pre-poll alliance and has 60 seats on that basis. Can that be done?
Mr. Karan, I am surprised that this matter should at all be a subject of debate. The facts are so clear, the law is so clear that there can be no debate on it. Let me refer
this
to
point about alliances.
Alliances are not recognized in law. I think the distinguished lawyers, all the three of them know it very well, that alliances are not mentioned in the law. Parties are mentioned.
I'm stopping you because I want to clarify this for the audience. You're saying to me that Prashant Bhushan's point, which is an echo of Abhishek Singhvi's earlier point, that Congress can claim leadership of the opposition on the grounds that it heads the single biggest pre-poll alliance, the UPA, which has 60 seats and therefore is above the 10%, that is not recognized by law.
That's right.
So that's ruled out.
Completely.
Well, very quickly, let me go back to those two lawyers, because both of them took an opposite view. Have you heard that, Abhishek Singhvi, and then I'll go to Prashant Bhushan, that your claim as a head of a UPA pre-poll alliance is not recognized by the law? How do you respond to that?
Can I respond? The whole basis of the argument against us is that there is this old rule, a quorum is required, therefore the opposition must match the quorum. Now, there is nothing sacrosanct about it. It's a very academic, sterile view, because that is in the context of running parliament through the opposition. If there is no quorum, parliament will not take place. The opposition to be recognized need not be at the quorum level, only by changing 121. 121 is not parliamentary statute. You are changing statutes every day. You are changing the constitution of India.
But you're answering a different point. I take your point. You're answering a different point to what Mr. Kashyap made.
If parliament is abolished by the government or by the king,
just a moment.
By the king, the opposition should be able to run it.
Abhishek Singhvi, I'm going to stop you. I take your point. It's a fair point, but it's not actually an answer to what Mr. Kashyap said. You're bringing up a completely different issue. So let me go to Prashant Bhushan. Prashant Bhushan, you too were arguing that in fact the leadership of the opposition can be given to the leader of the biggest pre-poll alliance, and therefore this 10% rule can thereby be circumvented. Now, you've heard Mr. Kashyap say that parliamentary laws and legislation don't recognize alliances. How do you respond to that? Because his point is the UP as a whole can't claim leadership of the opposition. No 2 or 3 parties can get together to do it.
Mr. Kashyap doesn't seem to understand the difference between law and convention. He is relying upon convention and saying that this convention is the law. There is no law which says that for a leader of the opposition, you cannot have a leader of the opposition unless you have a opposition party which has at least 10% of the seats in parliament. There is no such law. There is only a convention, and there is some speaker's orders, etc., which do not constitute law as such. However, even if it did constitute law, what is the problem in changing this speaker's order or changing this convention in order to accommodate the greater spirit of democracy, which requires you to have an opposition and a leader of the opposition, and so many statutes which have come which require, which make the leader of an opposition an important player in the selection of important statutory authorities.
I take your point completely.
What's the sanctity of this rule or this sanctity of this convention?
I take your point. Let me put your question, because I think it's a very important question, to Pinky Anand. Pinky Anand, what you've actually heard Prashant Bhushan argue is this, that beyond laws, beyond rules, what is important is the sanctity and principles of democracy, and what I might add and call the morality of politics. Both of that requires that you should and must have a leader of opposition, because without one, your parliamentary democracy will be either undemocratic or at least ineffective. Why not, therefore, in the greater interest of Indian democracy, why can't your party accept that we may need to change the law, if there is a law, and ensure that hereafter the single largest party in opposition, regardless of its size, will be the official leader of the opposition? Do that in the bigger interest of Indian democracy.
Karan, it's very nice to have advice, and even from Mr. Prashant Bhushan, but I wonder why this great theory of parliamentary democracy or the larger interest or the morality was not an issue anytime between 80 and 89 when there was no leader of opposition. I don't know why this did not come up and why
well,
suddenly
Abhishek
it has come up at this stage.
Abhishek Singhvi
without
gave you
any
an
basis.
answer to
A,
that.
B.
He said the issue wasn't challenged earlier.
Well, just Karan one.
He
Karan,
says
I
it
just want
wasn't
to add.
challenged earlier. It is being challenged now. Things
That's
respond
not
to
the question.
challenges.
The question is not, no, Karan, what we are talking about is why is the majority party not looking at appointing an opposition party for the larger interest of the democracy as made out by Prashant Bhushan and possibly even by Abhishek. One is saying only this, that why was this interest not thought about in 1889 when the UPA was in power? That is one of the questions.
It wasn't challenged at the time.
Is the parliamentary democracy has a certain basis and no, maybe it was challenged or not challenged, but you are today addressing, for example, to us as the majority party. I am answering as a majority party.
Okay.
A. And B, the question is that Abhishek himself admits to this much, that it is a decision of the speaker. So you cannot say that the speaker will have no decision. C, the question is the existing law stands, the existing rules stand, which do stand, and conventions have the force of law. That is well established parliamentary practice in this country. So those directions do stand. Once you have that 1/10 requirement, the question of making it on the basis of coalition or alliances is something which has to be considered. It cannot be done overnight just because today the UPA has lost out in such a manner and the Congress party has way short of the strength required to make it as the opposition. And finally, the leader of opposition enjoys several privileges which are based upon the factum that they have been able to secure a certain number of seats at the minimum to constitute a quorum.
Okay, let's separate, Mr. Kashyap, the fact that if there is a change in the law, the beneficiary would be Congress, because you may not deem Congress to be deserving of a change of the law. Let's separate that. Let's talk about the principle of the matter as Prashant Bhushan tried to enunciate it. In a democracy, we believe in the 21st century that a leader of the opposition is essential, because otherwise it won't be democratic, it won't be effective. We're talking now about the principles of democracy. We're talking about what I called a moment ago the morality of politics. In that bigger, wider picture, has the time come for the law to be amended, for a special act perhaps to be passed, to deem that hereafter the largest opposition party in parliament, regardless of size, will have that official status?
First, I would like to thank Mr. Prashant Bhushan for drawing my attention to my ignorance about difference between law and convention. As for the sanctity, what is the sanctity? The sanctity is of the rule of law. We are governed by rule of law. Democracy also requires rule of law.
A new law?
Democracy requires rule of law. Now I will draw your attention to another law which is conclusive, the 1998 law passed by Parliament. The 1998 law called the leaders and chief whips of recognized parties.
Can I interrupt you there, sir? Can I interrupt you? You're going back to a technical issue rather than answer my bigger moral question.
I'm talking of law.
But let me point out to you
that which is the law of the land.
That law was designed to only create the basis on which facilities are given to parties and groups. That law wasn't designed to determine who becomes leader of the opposition and whether that leadership post requires certain minimum seats.
That is not correct. It refers to recognized parties. It refers to recognized groups, gives the exact numbers.
I take your point.
It says if it is 55 plus, then it will be a recognized party. If it is between 30 and 54, it will be a recognized group.
I take your point, but let's not get lost in those. I was raising, sir, a different issue. I was saying, in the light and interest of India's democracy and what I call the morality of politics, should we now pass a new law which says hereafter, the single largest opposition party, regardless of size, will have the official status of leader of the opposition?
It will be entirely anti-democratic and immoral to pass such a law. Are you saying that when Nehru was prime minister, when Indira Gandhi was prime minister, and when Rajiv Gandhi... No, world changes. When these were prime ministers, then there was no democracy in this country? and large number of
there
countries.
There are many people who would say that democracy was impaired when Mrs. Gandhi was Prime Minister, but that's a different issue.
That is a different issue.
Let me.
But
I'm
Nehru
running
was
out
Prime
of time.
Minister, Rajiv Gandhi was Prime Minister, and a large number of countries in the world have no recognized the
I'm running out of time. I'm not going to go to Abhishek Singhvi because we know that as a congressperson he would strongly disagree with Mr. Kashyap. I'm going to go to Prashant Bhushan, who in many ways has supported Abhishek Singhvi, and put to you this point. When I asked Mr. Kashyap whether in the bigger, wider interest of morality and democracy we need a new law which says that hereafter, regardless of size, the single largest party will be the official leader of opposition leader, he said no, it would be undemocratic, it would be wrong. A quick answer to that, a quick answer.
What's undemocratic about having a leader of opposition when the leader of opposition is such an important person in the functioning of our democracy?
Okay.
He is recognized in so many acts to be in the selection committee. So therefore, Pinky is right that if one of these persons dies or is not available for any reason,
sharp answer. I'm running out of time.
then the selection committee will still function. But what's the reason for not having him?
In other words, what you're saying, in the bigger interest of India's
just on the
democracy.
basis of a technical convention.
So what you're saying, and I'm repeating it, is in the bigger interest of Indian democracy, we may need a new law that circumvents either precedents of the past or rules of the past which prevent Congress getting that job. It's not Congress that we wish to benefit, it's Indian democracy that we wish to benefit, and to ensure that there's always a leader of opposition. Clearly, this is a debate that will rankle. Clearly, it's an issue that's going to be controversial. Whatever decision Sumitra Mahajan, the Speaker, takes, which will happen when Parliament convenes on Monday.